Hello, and welcome to the StepStories podcast. I'm your host, Robin Breuner. And today I have a special guest on the podcast, my daughter, Natalie. Hi, Natalie.
Hi.
I'm so glad you're here. And thank you for doing this. I know it's a little weird being with your mom talking about the family stuff, but that is what we're going to talk about today. I started this as it was going to maybe be a solo show, just to share my story a little bit more. I've had a lot of people ask me more about my story. Why don't I share more? And there's a couple of reasons for that. Natalie kind of knows this. Well, she definitely knows this because she's my daughter, but I do tend to be a little bit shy and private, which I always think is so weird for somebody who wants to be on a podcast talking about very personal things. And also because I have written a book about it and I'm hoping to get it out into the world in the next year and hoping people will read that to hear more of the details. But I would like my listeners to know me a little bit better. So anyway, I do try to drop in tidbits as we go along and as I relate to somebody else's story. But I have so much respect for my guests who come on here and are brave and willing to share the details of their story. And I think sharing details is a way of making things universal because the more you can share about the everyday things that go on in blended families along with the big umbrella, um, I think it hits a universal note. And so that's why I brought Natalie on today to just help counterbalance that and talk about these things from her perspective. And from being parented, she does not come from a blended family, but she's been parented by two parents who both came from blended families. So it'll be interesting to talk about that a little bit with her. I guess before I do jump in and not make this a solo show, let's talk about you, Natalie, a little bit. You've had an incredible last year and are embarking on a very interesting new one. And so why don't you talk a little bit about that? It's pretty cool.
Sure, I'm happy to. Well, first off, thanks for having me here. I know it feels kind of funny. Thanks for having me here. But it's true. I mean, I'm honored to be a guest on your fabulous Step Stories podcast. I've been your number one fan, I like to think. Although I don't know if that's true because you've had many, so it's been such a joy for me to get to watch you flourish and spread the word about different experiences of being in step family. And although I'd like to say fortunate enough to have grown up in a non-blended family with you and Dad, I also have great respect for people who do, and I have many friends in my own generation who have had those experiences. So I've gotten to see it firsthand, and then of course hearing your story and Dad's story over the years. I feel in a way I've grown up with it, but on one level, detached. And I'm really grateful for that experience, and also grateful to see what it can be like on the other side, and both the successes and also some of those challenges that come along. So anyway, that's my elevator pitch for saying thanks for having me. But yeah, I'll share a little bit about what's going on with me. I'm happy to. So it feels funny to say my fiance, we've been together for 8 years next month. So I'm used to saying my partner, my boyfriend, but I'm still working on that transition.
Because you just got engaged, right?
Yes, we just got engaged.
It's a new thing.
It's new, so I'm kind of practicing the word, which is really fun. I just turned 30, got engaged, had the holidays, all the big things in 1 week. And it also coincided with the week that Seth, my fiance, and I just got back from a year of traveling. We traveled the world. We worked remote for some of it. We relaxed for some of it. And it was just the experience of a lifetime getting to have that adventure become, go from a dream to reality. And so we came back and had all those big other life moments. And now we are kind of doing all the back to being adults. And, right now I'm actually today, hopefully, fingers crossed, buying a car. We're also hopefully today signing a lease on a new apartment in San Francisco. Um, Also have some job stuff going on. So I'm working full, just about to be working full time again. And also tomorrow touring uh, a university for grad school to become an art therapist. So it's kind of, I was just saying to my mom, everything, everywhere, all at once. So I'm completely overwhelmed, but overjoyed to be in such a privileged and exciting, time of life right now. And Mom, you've been so helpful in helping me to just support me and not letting me doubt myself too much in these big transitional, steps. So
Well,
thanks.
yeah, of course. And oh my gosh, well, what you did was incredible. A lot of people's dream to do, and you just pulled it together and did it. And by the way, her fiance's name is Seth. We can call him Seth and not just fiance. Um, but just in a nutshell, why don't you say where you went? Because it's pretty cool what you did.
Sure. So we were pretty outdoorsy and adventurous. So we wanted to really experience different aspects of life in the world. And so we started out in Costa Rica where we really just kind of unplugged and relaxed properly for the first time in our lives. And we kind of facetiously, but also seriously we called it our micro retirement, which I heard once. And I thought that was hilarious on actually a podcast. We're like, oh my God, we're burnt out at the ripe age of 29.
Not good.
Not good. So that's why it was nice. We both worked really hard in our careers and continue to do so, but it was nice to kind of refresh and come back. And now I have a lot of energy to set out for, new career goals tenaciously. But I highly recommend anybody who's considering it. It was absolutely the best decision ever, despite things being crazy right now. It was all worth it. But yeah, so we started out in Costa Rica and we just surfed every day. And I did yoga almost every day. And that was just really wonderful, really amazing to take a break from life. We got rid of our apartment in San Francisco. I sold my car. We both quit our tech nonprofit jobs and really went for it. And actually, my parents came out to visit. So that was really exciting too. After that, we went all around Southeast Asia and really took an amazing food tour, just eating in, hole in the wall places. And then after that, came home for a little bit, kind of recharged, worked, had some family events, and then had the last 4.5 months in all over Europe. And I was working part-time then, but yeah, that was pretty incredible too.
And one of the things that you did in the vein of this episode is about getting to know me a little bit more and about my life. And that includes my current family, not just my childhood family. Her brother lives in Berlin. And so she went and spent time with him over there when she went to Europe and traveled a bit with him. And he is married. And so that was a special thing for them too.
Yeah, it was really nice. The four of us kids, I say kids in quotes, but we Seth, Ben, my brother, and my sister-in-law Maisie, and we really had a lot of time to really get to know each other as adults and friends rather than just siblings. And I think that was really important because I've known intuitively my whole life. We were really close growing up as kids, and we've always been close. But over the years, dynamics change and family dynamics change, and you grow up and develop your own unique personalities, and sometimes that can be really great, and sometimes it can cause tension. And I think it was really important for me. I knew intuitively that I needed to grow that, relationship, just the two of us and also the four of us as a small peer cohort. And it was like one of the best decisions of the entire travel year. Seth and I both say that that Berlin section was the best. Um, yeah. So,
Well, and that all also kind of plays into the subject of this episode a little bit, because one of the things I wanted to talk about is my background as a stepdaughter and how that's affected me as a parent. And one of those subjects has to do with the letting go, the having the confidence of seeing your kids as they get older and having that place in your heart to figure out how to keep them close and let them go at the same time. And so I do want to
mhm,
talk about that. And I'm going to go backwards a little bit. I just want to give my background a little bit more and then catch up with Natalie about her coming into the my story. But I know I've shared quite a bit about the fact that my mother died when I was a little girl. I was young. I was 10, and she was young. She was only 32, and I was the oldest daughter, the oldest child, and it impacted me greatly. And I've had to kind of cope with almost some abandonment issues my whole life from that loss. I was very close to her. And my father remarried very quickly. And really, my story is about my long term feelings of trying to keep the connection to my father. And it just eluded me because he was busy. And now that I'm a mother and an adult, I can understand it better. I can see it better. But as a kid and growing up, I didn't understand it. He was pulled in so many directions. And these stepmothers came in, and I had one stepmother and I had a stepbrother. And then that ended. And then I had another stepmother and another set of step siblings. And it was really hard to navigate it. And it had a lot of long-term effects on me. So one of the things that I'm doing right now as well, because grief was part of it, and I'm getting a certificate as a grief coach so that I can help people when they come on the podcast and in other ways to understand their grief better. I've had my own, and and as I've said many times, I've said in my intro, I'm not a therapist. Actually, Natalie has a background, and we'll talk about this in a second, in early childhood education and psychology. She has an education in that, and she's getting ready to pursue art therapy because she's also an artist. But for me, I don't have that official training, but what I have that I think is so impactful in being empathic or empathetic to others is I've had the school of life and the school of wisdom and the school of experience, and have experienced a lot of things. I was lucky. I had stable is the absolute wrong word, but I had what I needed materially growing up for sure. I had love from my father, but I also experienced the tough stuff, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, loneliness, anxiety, depression. I experienced in my step families alcoholism and mental illness and substance addiction problems. And so I've seen it all, and that's helped me see things, see the world, and see families from a particular angle. So anyway, I will go back to that a little bit more, but I don't want to leave Natalie out of the conversation. So I think you know about these things, Natalie. You may not know in deep details about some of the addiction stuff, but I know that you know about some of this. And I'm just curious how you see me as a parent, how that's affected me as a parent. Have you observed in me or in your parents' relationship some of those things that stuck with me and affected me in the parenting?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great and a hard question. Um, I would say, you know, uh, of course, your mom died when you were so young, when you were 10. And I remember when I was 10, I remember thinking to myself, wow, I truly cannot imagine. I am so deeply dependent on you as a parent and as a friend. It makes me want to cry just thinking about what that must have been like for you and also for dad. His mom died when he was 5 years old. And both of your journeys through step families, step parents, step siblings, the trials and tribulations of all of that. I can say that from my own perspective, I have seen you go through phases of grief in different ways. So, for example, when I called him Papa, when your dad, Roger, died, when I was actually around the age perhaps of when your mom died. So, my grandfather died around when your mom died when you were 10.
You were
Um,
7, just jumping
okay,
in.
7, 10.
And Ben was 10. Yeah. Yeah.
I was little, but I
You were
remember
the
it.
age of Aunt Cindy, my sister, Cindy.
Okay, yeah, I remember it viscerally. And but what I think I remember, the grief that a 7-year-old can feel, for the grandparent dying is one thing. It's upsetting, but okay, grandpa was older. He felt old to me, but now in hindsight, I'm like, wow, he was around your guys' age now. That's pretty shocking. But I remember most how affected you were and how jarring that was when you took us out of school that day. And I know that that's not necessarily what we're talking about in terms of your upbringing with step families, but what I want to talk about is that I remember how, a sudden death is one thing, but a sudden death with a lifetime of compounded grief and anxiety and, complexities layered on top of that with your past history with step families and, you know, uh, understanding to the best of my ability what happened with, um, you know, we called her, uh, Nanny. Joni was her name, your stepmother at the time. I always say that the day that my grandfather died, without getting too deep into it, but the day that my grandfather died, I also lost a grandmother because that was the last time I saw her. And I think that that was the first time I really started to comprehend, oh, it's not as black and white as like, this is grandma and grandpa. I started to understand when I was little, like, oh, this is complicated and really hard. And my mom is trying her and my dad, their very best to protect us and protect that image of um, you know, um, Joni being my grandmother, even though it was hard because there was a lot of bitterness and greed that went on when she kind of abandoned the family. And so anyway, I think that that's about as much as I can share in terms of my direct experience of how grief impacted you as an adult. But of course, I've seen over the years, um, you know, you've as I've gotten older, you've kind of loosened the reins a little bit on sharing some of your struggles with your grief over the years and how it's hit you and affected you in different phases of your own life. Which I won't put words in your mouth. If you want to share about that, um, I'll let you share. But uh, I've I've come to learn how, we're given this perception that, fortunately, I haven't had to have too much experience firsthand in my nuclear family or my my extended family too much grief, and I am grateful for that every day. I know it's coming for me, unfortunately, but I try to just appreciate every day as it comes. But I've come to learn that, like, in society, up front, it feels like grief is this we're socially constructed to believe that grief is this brief period of time of, okay, you're sad, go take a break from work. Now, basically get over it and go back to work. And I've learned over the years that it's such a process that ebbs and flows. And so, when you've talked about some of your struggles where it, your grief kind of hit you all at once, with a brick wall in college in a different way, it manifested differently, or later in life, or how you raised us, Ben and I, as kids, and continue to raise us, even though we're adults, like how you interact with us, or your anxieties that come from your own, traumas in the past. I can see that more and more as I get older.
Well, one of the things that, and I'm sort of wondering here how far to go down this other path, talking about the grandparents. And I don't think I want to fully go that way because we have other things I think we can talk about.
Yeah.
But the long and short of it is Natalie and her brother Ben only knew my second stepmother. My first stepmother was around, but unfortunately, they never knew her. And that's just the nature of how things went with my father and these women. Um, but yeah, when my father died, things got really rough. And my second stepmother and her kids, we just, I- again, I hope you read my book, but things happened and there was just even more grief on top of grief. So that's as far as I really want to go there. But what?
I just wanted to jump in and add a little positive spin,
Yeah.
a little silver lining that we've talked about over the years, that despite so much loss and grief and uh, absence that you experienced, and then us kids subsequently experienced without having grandparents to grow up with and be close in our life. On your side, of course, we it's a different story with dad's side. We had a grandmother who still, she was a a stepmother to him, but she was there since he was 5. So she really was his mother role, and she did such a good job, and she only passed last year, which was, uh, such a tragedy, but we were lucky to have her as kids, as a grandparent role our whole lives. But I have to say that the silver lining of the loss on your side, Mom, is that we had other incredible family members in the extended family who stepped up. And, you can speak to that if you want, but I can say from my perspective, they stepped in like your aunts and uncles and your siblings as like stand-in parents, or stand-in. You helped to raise your siblings, and they helped to raise you, in turn. And I think that's really beautiful, because then also Ben and I got stand-in grandparents on your side. My great aunts and uncles have been incredible throughout our life. I was just texting with my great aunt yesterday, and my aunts and uncles were so close with, and I'm just really lucky in that regard, that not everybody's going to have that in step family situations, but I was, really, really blessed with alternative, um, family roles like that.
And that is one of the things that I was going to end this episode with, just talking about one thing I do, and I've said it on other episodes. I think extended family is so important. And not only did I experience it as a counterbalance to what was going on in my own immediate family, like she said, like Natalie said, like you said, you're there. Um, yes, the aunts and uncles and cousins and my siblings, if you're lucky enough, and I know not everybody has that. I know that's not available to everybody, but to the extent you have it, definitely use those resources and that support if you are a parent for your kids. If a kid has lost a parent or there's been a divorce, um, and if you are an aunt or an uncle, same thing. Be there for a niece or a nephew, certainly a grandchild, because that stability that you can lend, that support, could be the thing that really create success for them down the road. And I've seen it. I have friends who've done it for their siblings' kids, and it's made all the difference. I've got
Mhm.
one in mind right now who she herself had been an attorney, and she was a wonderful support for her niece and nephew, and they're going on to law school. I mean, they had a tough childhood, and I believe she was one of the reasons that they're now really stable. So, anyway, I won't keep going on that, but I do agree. And yes, to my husband's family, he had a wonderful stepmother. He lost his mother at the age of 37 and his sister at the age of 37. And my mother at 32, they all died of breast cancer. So, um, but stepping in his own aunts and uncles did the same. And he had a wonderful stepmother. So he had one of those good experiences. Anyway,
Mhm.
um, I though wanted to go back to you, Natalie. And one of the things I was waiting for you to talk about, and you're being very kind, but I know one of my flaws as a parent is that I have a lot of anxiety over um loss. Like I have a deep, deep fear of losing my children. Um, because of what happened to my mother and because I learned at such a young age that life is fragile and that the people you love most could go away. And so, unfortunately, that has shown up as a parent.
Mm.
And, letting Natalie going traveling the world this time was great because she went with her responsible boyfriend. But she has traveled in the past by herself, and I have been a nervous wreck because things have happened. She pushes me all the time because she's a risk taker, and was a risk taker. I was quite rebellious when I was younger, all tied back to trying to, I think, get my dad's attention. But anyway, she has a father who was a fighter pilot, Tomcat F-14 pilot. So unfortunately, that has transferred to her and to my son. And so I have these kids who grown up, skydiving and rock climbing and backcountry skiing and you name it. And I'm always like, could you just like go to the library and read or go pay for do something because you are just absolutely activating this anxiety that I've got that I can tell there are stories. There are stories of her going off in high school camping and me never hearing from her and asking her to please just check in when you get there because she's driving at night out to Yosemite. And lo and behold, she got lost and went like 8 hours in the wrong direction. And I'm calling the park
Fire
rangers and
department.
camp people. I mean, but I get super triggered because of this background. And that's been a really hard thing to navigate as a parent to trust. And I always thought of it and visualized it as, me having like a leash and then letting the leash go more and more and more as she got older because I had to for their own mental health and well-being and independence. And so there's that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you could talk a lot about that. But
Yeah.
okay, do you want to say something? Yeah.
Well, I'll just add, I I'm laughing because yes, so that is all very true. I will not try to make an excuse that I'm not uh risk leaning. However, I will say that you know me, I'm pretty responsible and calculated with my risk taking, and I've tried to I'll say about like our relationship, of course when you're younger, you're dumber, you take more risks without always thinking through the consequences versus when you get older, you think about y- you know, Seth and I just went skiing recently and we are like, make sure you stretch it out beforehand. We're like, oh my God, we're turning 30 versus when we were 20, we would have never done that. But I think something about our relationship is that I have always had a pretty good head on my shoulders. And I think, yeah, I get the risk taking, adrenaline junkie gene from dad. But I have the responsible, clear headed, my girlfriends all call me mom. That side of me is I get from you, and I'm grateful for that. Um, but I think that coming from the two sides, it's helped to balance me out to calculated risk is like what I like to call it. But I'll say to give you some credit, yes, we used to butt heads on it more of like, Mom, you got to let me spread my wings. It's fine. Like I'll be fine. But as I've gotten older, I've come to learn that about you more, which is, and you've learned that about yourself more in this healing process of writing your memoir or your step stories. Um, book and this podcast, like I think you've learned that and you've taught me that over time of like I'm not trying to be a nervous Nelly just because like it stems from this trauma and I had that loss so early on. I cannot bear something happening to you guys. Like that gave me immense empathy for you. And I think I started being better about, sending you my location before I would go on a run or this and that to help compensate, and not hold back from my own dreams, but also be a little bit more gentle with your own level of comfort and it, inversely you've let me spread my wings because I think we've built that trusting dynamic over the years. You've seen, okay, she actually is responsible and she's still going to do it anyway, but I trust her and vice versa. Like I trust that you're just looking out for me and then it comes from this deep place. And that you're still going to let me do it and support me in that and also be proud of me for tackling these big challenges and goals. And I think that has really like been a healing experience and only grown our own bond of trust more over the years through experience of trial and error.
Well,
I
and
commend you for that too.
thank you. And I think we could go down so many roads and maybe more parenting roads, but I'm trying to keep it on parenting as related to growing up in a step family. And
Hmm.
one of the well, there's two things that are coming to mind right now. One is also on the subject of traveling and traveling alone. And I myself traveled alone. And I always kind of laugh because I lived in France for a couple of years in Paris. I studied there and I traveled by myself quite a bit. And it's a completely different situation. My dad was so busy. He was like, good, stay, go over there. Let me know when you come back. And he was, it was easier for me to not be stirring things up with this blended family, honestly. So
I
that's
mean, you could
very
get by with
different.
more. You could slide under the radar a little easier than I could with
Yes,
stable
very much so.
parenting and a close
Yes.
eye.
Yes. So that's one thing. And another thing, and I do this is a hard one to talk about because I want to be careful, but I've also had to I'm very much still in the process of this journey, but as I mentioned that my son and your brother moved to Berlin. It's been almost 5 years now and it was meant to be a 1-year thing that's turned longer and for all I know it might be permanent. I'm hoping they'll still come back. But that's been a journey for me too. Um from my background, and losing my mother and trying to stay close to my father and letting, my children get to live their lives because it's their lives, just as I got to live my life and made my choices. And even though I'd like to be closer, it's a journey I'm working on, and it's really triggered by my background. And so that's just another thing from my background baggage to dealing with these things as a parent of children growing up. And then the last thing I just want to throw out, because I don't want to go too far down that road unless you wanted to say something, Natalie.
Right.
Okay. Um, Again, another touchy thing to say, but I'm just being honest, trying to let my listeners get to know me. But um, one of the things as a wife and mother that has also affected me is I've been married now 36 years. I've been with my husband 37 years. And we've, some of it's been a wild ride. He was a fighter pilot, he was in the Navy. We've moved around a bit. And, we've had our moments. And we've had our moments that have been tough, like anybody married long term has had. But one of the things also that always affects my way of thinking, again, was my childhood, because I think about, well, I have two choices here if things are tough. Yeah, we could split up, and then my family will be split, and then I potentially could have another husband. My husband could have another wife. My kids could have two families, and I could see my kids half the time, and they could go back and forth, and we wouldn't be together for holidays sometimes, and on and on. All the things that I know happen with blended families often, and that I saw happen in my family growing up with my step siblings. Since I didn't have a mother, I just had the one constant family with my father and the different stepmothers. But my step siblings, of course, they had their fathers who were married to other people, and they were going back and forth. And so I witnessed it very much firsthand. And the answer always came back to me: I would rather work on what I have and fix what I have and keep my family together if I can. And I know that's not always possible for people for a lot of different reasons, and I get that. But um, it very much affected me as a wife. And I'm still in a long-term marriage. I'm glad that I made those choices. I'm glad that I still have the same family I started with. But I will never know, what life could be like in a blended family. But I do know that's where I came from based on my childhood. So anyway, we're just going on and on all kinds of stuff here that could get me in trouble talking about it. So anyway, I think we're kind of coming to the end of our time here. But do you have any thoughts on this, Nat?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is a tough subject, but I will say, this is getting real personal, but when we were a younger family, when I was younger, um, I feel like, and I didn't know it at the time. I understand it now as an adult, but looking back, I can see how some of, when you guys were younger too, like some of your upbringings and experiences being in step families that weren't always doing it successfully. Sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. Especially coming from your side, a lot of challenges that I've heard from over the years. I can recognize how that perhaps affected your guys' relationship, yours and dad's, and your conflict resolution styles. I still see it today from time to time, but I think you guys have
We're
gotten a
not
lot.
perfect.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely not.
uh,
But I think that you guys have really stepped up and um, worked through a lot of those trickle down effects of modeling of that you picked up on perhaps from your own step families um and learn your own way. But I think that, and I'm about to get married, so I'm figuring this out myself, and in our own
Mhm.
versions of conflict resolution, and sometimes what not to do from you guys, but also a lot of what to do, and I think that, a lot of those perhaps bad habits, quote unquote, that you guys picked up on might have been from your instability growing up, right? Like you didn't have constant, stable, positive parent role modeling all of the time. A lot of the time you didn't, from what I've learned from your story. And so, over the years, you've been, both of you, figuring it out. And when I was a kid, just like every kid, you think that your parents are godlike figures who know everything. And the unfortunate reality of growing up is that you realize that that's a bit of an illusion, and that your parents are, it's such a cliche, but it's so true. Your parents are just people who are figuring it out. And the older I get, the more empathy I have towards that. You go from this timeline of, when you're a kid, you think that they're these all-knowing beings. When you're a teenager and you're rebelling and you're, trying to gather your own independence, you realize, like, oh, like, they're just human beings. They don't know everything. I know everything. And then you get past that and you actually become an adult who is nearing, for me at least, not everybody, having my own kids eventually, and having more empathy for that humanity, and actually seeing more of the beauty in that because it's more realistic. I don't put you on a pedestal, but I also don't cut you down. I see you as you are. And I think that's really beautiful because it's also helped our own relationship, my relationship to you and to dad, to my brother, to see you guys as the beautiful humans that you are, and not always trying to only see the good or only pick out the bad. Um, and so I think that, like, just to come back to the original point, yeah, I've seen how perhaps how the instability in your guys' upbringings affected you, and especially your conflict resolution styles, and how they can contrast, compete with each other or have tension. Um, but I think you both have done a really good job of unlearning a lot of that and creating your own styles as parents and as a husband and wife, to figure out what works for you, and not just modeling it off of your own parental role modeling or lack thereof. And I've tried to do the same over the years. Like, okay, what do I really like that you guys taught me as parents? And what did I not like as much? And what do I want to do differently in my own relationship? And I've seen that in Ben and Maisie as well, about how, like, we've created slightly different spaces that are unique to ourselves, but still draw from the wonderful parts of our own upbringings with you guys.
Well, thank you for all that, and I'm glad that, it's been a process for you, a positive process, hopefully for Ben too. And there's something also that I wanted to say earlier, and this reminded me of this talking about parents just figuring it out and being humans. And I do wanna just say that I know that my stepmothers were also humans just trying to figure it out. I know now as a mother, looking back, that it had to be really hard to come in and create this new family and blend their own kids with their husband's kids and vice versa with my father. And I get it, and I know, and I, I have worked on forgiveness for things for a while now, but the parenting side of it and figuring out how to keep a cohesive family side of it, I know wasn't an easy thing. So,
Mm.
um, anyway, I would like to just we're at the end of our interview. In fact, we went pretty long here today, but I'm glad we did. We had a lot of things to talk about. But I especially want to say if you're a stepdaughter who's listening to this podcast, I want you to know that you are you're seen here on this podcast. I don't know how else to say that. You have empathy here. If you ever want to share a story, anybody, a step parent too, of course, please contact me, robinbreuner@gmail.com. And Just a last plea I'd like to make to parents is, and it seems obvious, but I just continue to look at the state of the world, state of our country, and please, please model compassion and kindness. Give your kids boundaries because I do feel like so much of this does start at home and with the children, and they grow up and model these things in the world, and we really need it. So that's my little plea to maybe try to help the world a little bit. But Natalie, do you have any other last thoughts?
No, I mean, other than I appreciate the opportunity to be able to come on and um at first when you proposed like, "Oh, would you like to come on?" I had this knee-jerk reaction of like, no, I'm not from a blended family. I don't want to speak for other people." And I like how we were able to not speak for other people's experiences who do live in blended families, but rather um I can help bolster your experiences and answer your questions about how, the trickle down effect of coming from two, being the product of two children of step families, how, not to toot my own horn, but I think I turned out okay. And like there's hope, I'm not perfect. I'm screwed up in a lot of ways too. But I think that there's just because you come from I hate the term broken family, but I think that a lot of people do resonate with that term, or if you come from a blended family in a nicer perspective. Um, I think that there's a bit of this, and I'm no guru on this by any means. I'm purely speaking from my own opinion, but I'd like to say that you're not messing up future generations, or your parents aren't going to mess up their grandkids. And you know th- of course that can happen, and I don't want to say mess up, but affect, with a ripple effect. But I of course that can happen, but there's so much hope for people who, even if you are experiencing a family that is blended and maybe it's not going so well right now, there's absolutely hope. And I think you and dad are perfect examples of that, of really traumatic experiences with step families a lot of the time. Um, but there's a lot of hope of like, okay, you guys as parents can do better, or learn from past challenges and figure out, how do I want to take the control over my life and my children and raise them in a way that feels good to me and my partner, if you have a partner, um and create, what cultivate what you want, and take that control back when it was taken away from you when you were younger. And that's really what to me, that's what it looks like from the outside. Control that was taken from you, and so now you can take that back. And I feel like I really heard that from Sierra, my friend, wonderful friend Sierra's story, uh, a couple episodes ago, where she really talked about really like kind of taking that control back after her childhood. And I think that that's a really, really beautiful and promising thing. So thanks for having me. And
Thank you so much for being on
I
here. I
appreciate
really
it.
appreciate it. It was fun.
Thanks for listening.
And now let's go have lunch.
I'm starving.
Good.